Okay, so look, thanks for joining me, folks. Today's lunch and learn session is an inFocus session where we look at the Zoom integration in Brightspace, which means that I suppose initially at least, I'm going to take you through how that toolset works, the ins and outs of it. We can chat around it if people have particular questions around it, and then we'll open things up for sort of open Q&A as we do in the lunch and learn sessions. It is being recorded, and we do make these sessions available on the DLT LMS transition page under learning resources. I will kill Teams in the background so we don't get horrible pop-ups down the bottom. Now let's go. First thing that we need to know is that any integration with a third-party tool always has, usually there's going to be swings and roundabouts in terms of things they do well and other things that they don't do as well as using the actual tool directly. And when we talk about Zoom, that means CSU staff going into the Zoom portal at charlessturt.zoom.us and signing in and accessing all of Zoom's features that are in the back end of Zoom when we go in. So this is the full tool set that's available to people with Zoom. And then we get into an LMS integration, which has a reduced list, but it also means that the two systems can talk to each other. So I just wanted to make that distinction before I start playing around with what the LTI does inside Brightspace. So when we talk about LTI, that stands for Learning Technology Interoperability. Sometimes people will cut that short to integration, but effectively it means two systems talking to each other. So look, I'm going to jump into the training site, which is just a subject site for our purposes today, to show you how this tool behaves. And I will say that I'm extremely impressed with how the Zoom integration works in Brightspace. It is much better than what it was in i2 in a number of ways. So let's start by finding the tool, and it exists to both students and academics underneath the communication menu, online meeting Zoom. And if we open this up, we need to wait a moment for the tool to load. Effectively, what it's doing is accessing your profile information in Zoom and opening it up within the Brightspace interface. So it's going to give us a number of columns in here where we have these tabs: upcoming meetings, previous meetings, personal meeting room, and cloud recordings. So the tool interface remains the same as what it was inside Interact 2. With the normally as part of training, we would talk about staff avoiding using personal meeting rooms inside a subject site. The reason for that being, even though you can use the same address every time for those meetings, etc., it does create issues with recordings, access to recordings at other times. And really, it's meant to be used maybe for your private purposes rather than for a part of a subject site that's available to all students. So I usually mention that to people, is avoid using the personal meeting room function. We normally create meetings in the Zoom interface by starting up here underneath schedule a new meeting. We'll give it a title. So for this purpose, I'm going to call this, let's go with weekly online tutorial. We'll leave it nice and general for the moment, and then we might make some changes. So if I put this in here and start going down to the other fields, avoid description. It's meaningless. It's not visible to the students anyway. You don't need anything in there. Then we have our date. So let's say that I wanted to start making this for next week on Tuesday night. And you'll notice it uses this American formatting as well for the date. So it has month, then day, which is kind of annoying, but Zoom does this. Then we can switch, put our time on. So we're going to say 7 o'clock, goes for an hour. So 7 to 8. Make sure your time zone is set so that it mirrors your current time zone. We have had some feedback from academics that had their students saying to them, why is it showing to me a different day to what you've put in? It is basically because Zoom, just like the LMS, will pick up on your system settings. So if the students have a computer where they've actually not chosen the right time zone, for example, or changed it inadvertently, then the Zoom times that they see will end up being different to the ones that you create. So in terms of creating the meetings in the first instance, make sure it's the right time zone. This is going to be a recurring meeting for this scenario, and I'm going to create a weekly recurring Zoom meeting. And at the moment, you'll notice that it's talking about Thursdays. Now, I said I wanted my online meeting to start on Tuesday, the 16th. So why is this talking about Thursdays? And the reason for that is as soon as you check this recurring box, it looks at the current day, the day you are making the booking. So that's the first kind of catch there. I'm going to get rid of that and in fact choose the Tuesday, uncheck the Thursday, and then you'll see it has amended that day detail up here. It's kind of annoying. I suppose it assumes that you're always going to create meetings on the same day you want to run meetings, which is ludicrous. So as long as you know that it's there and that you need to uncheck it, you'll be fine. Now, then we get to see how long we want to run this for. And there's a bit of a bug in this tool. You need to choose the end date when you want the meetings to finish rather than trying to identify the number of occurrences. If you choose a number of occurrences and put a number that's greater than about 7 or 8, it won't show the second half of them. It doesn't even create them. So make sure that you're going to the end date area and choosing your end date, then it will create all of the meetings. So at this point, I'm going to say, let's say the end of October. I haven't actually checked my calendar recently to see when 60 finishes. I can see the exam period begins on the 14th of October. Okay, let's say the end of October anyway. 29th, which is in fact my birthday. So consider yourself all informed. Now, if we move down, don't worry about registration. We don't use that feature here. By default, CSU has a waiting room facility turned on. The way the waiting room works in Zoom is authenticated Charles Sturt users, where the students or staff will pass straight through the waiting room and join the live meeting. They never even see it. Because we're in an integration inside the LMS subject site, they will be authenticated. If they come into the subject site and go into the Zoom area and join the meeting, they'll pass straight through the waiting room. If, however, you get the link to your Zoom meeting room and you email it to your students or send it to them in an announcement, there is no guarantee that they are coming into the subject site or that they're authenticated, which means you may get a whole bunch of students appearing in the waiting room waiting for you to admit them. So can I advise potentially as a strategy, you really want to get into the habit yourself, your markers, your students of all accessing Zoom through the subject site. That way you will avoid any of those authentication issues. Just get into that habit. I know that a lot of people like to send emails to students saying tonight's meeting is, at 7 o'clock and here's the link. Does sound convenient, but they're not authenticated. There's no guarantee. So you're creating a rod for your own back at that point. Send them through the subject site. All right, so the waiting room's turned on by default. That's the only setting we really need to make sure we're across. If we scroll down underneath, I have my video and audio turned off for people when they join the meeting. So it's opt-in for them to unmute or turn their webcams on. But those settings are individual. You can change those if you like. Just be aware that if people join and their microphones and things are on, they may be showing or you might hear things that you don't want to hear, I suppose. All right, underneath we've got our meeting options. I usually have these two selected, allowing them to join before me and that they're muted when they come into the room. If you want to consider the meeting being recorded automatically, and I know some academics are interested in this feature, you cannot allow the students to join before you because at that point, they are being recorded without their consent. So it's one or the other. If you're going to use record the meeting automatically and record to the cloud, you must turn off enable join before the host. Otherwise, at that point, the students are being recorded without their permission. So think about that. I usually make that a point when I start a meeting and introduce what we're going to do, and then I launch into, yes, it is going to be recorded. We turn on the recording, etc., so that they are informed of that, but you may have a different approach. We've got a question, Kel, is that?
Yes, can you uncheck the waiting room option to avoid entirely?
You can. It's on by default as a security protocol at the uni, but yes, you could uncheck it. That then makes it a public Zoom meeting effectively with no security measures in check. All right. The last area to talk about is at the bottom. In Zoom, you're probably aware that you can add co-hosts or alternative hosts to the meeting. There's two ways to approach this when we talk about an LTI. One of them is if they're joining through the subject site and they're a member of the teaching team, so subject convener, coordinator, alternative, what's the role? Additional academic. Any of those roles will actually be able to join the Zoom meeting and be recognized as a co-host automatically. They are elevated into those roles because the LTI recognizes who they are in the class list and puts them in. The same way that it recognizes who the students are and lets them in, but it won't give them host or co-host rights. So I can see, for example, we've got people in the meeting who've been authenticated in our participant list, like Slav and Amita and Andrea, for example. They're authenticated, but they're not given host and co-host rights. If you specifically want to give a Zoom user co-host rights, you can put their email address in here. What it relies
Sorry,
upon.
I'm in a training session.
I know. I'm with you, Slav.
Oh, sorry. Didn't realize I wasn't muted.
No, that's okay. So you can add their email address in here. So I might do that with Slav's address here, for example, and I can add her in as a co-host and hit save. It will add them. Now, for this to work, they must have accessed Zoom before at CSU. What we mean by that is they have to have gone to the Zoom portal and signed in. They only need to do that once. But this is the same as Brightspace when we want to add new users to our class sites. They have to have accessed the system at least once. So this means that really our onboarding process for new staff must include go to Brightspace, so learn.csu, and sign in with your Charles Sturt credentials. That allows us to add them to subject sites in future. And the same is there for Zoom. You have to have gone to the Zoom portal at least once and click sign in so that you are in the system as a user. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to add you here. You're going to get an error. Now, I know that Slav has accessed Zoom once or twice, so I'm going to hit save. I can ignore that message at the top. So it's now created my Zoom meeting. It gives me a summary on that first screen. So we've created our weekly online tutorial meeting slot. There are 16 occurrences. And as part of the summary, you'll notice that it gives you the opportunity to add this to one of your calendar apps. So if you wanted your Zoom meeting to go into Outlook at the same time, this is where you can actually click on the ICS file here. It'll download it and open it up, adding it to your calendar in Outlook. So I'm being notified on my other screen. Do I want to add it to Outlook? So at this point, I'm not going to because this is just a training example, but you can add it to Outlook at the same time as you create the meetings. So I've got my summary. I've created the meeting. If I now click on the home option at the top here, it loads that first tab, upcoming meetings, and there they are. Every week on Tuesday at 7 o'clock, there's the link for students to join. Over here's the link on the right for me. If I want to start the meeting, I can start it whenever I like, but that is the time that it's scheduled for. I can also delete. And if I went to delete this, it would say, do you just want to delete this one or do I want to delete all of them? So if we were going through this list and saying, well, that's the mid-session break in these 2 weeks, there's not going to be any meetings, I'd go across and delete each of those individually. So that's the first part of creating the Zoom meeting inside this tool. After each of those meetings finish, if I'd made any recordings, they would be available to students underneath the Cloud Recordings tab. The meeting detail would also be passed through to this tab here, previous meetings. And at that point, you can get an attendance report from the tool. So, yep, Slav's got an email notifying her that she was invited to join because I added her as an alternative host as well. So that's good to know. The notifications are working. And as I said, once the meeting passes, the recordings then appear for students here in this area under Cloud Recordings. They can open those up and view the video or the audio from the meeting and download it as well. So if the students just wanted to listen to the audio file, they could, or get it on a local device, they can get hold of that as well. We'll even see that there's analytics available underneath showing access, etc., to that recording file. I'm not going to get into that too much today. I will talk about in the recording section, there is a great feature that allows you to determine whether or not the recordings are visible to students. By default, this button, Publish All Recordings, is checked, and every recording you make will be available to students. They come in here, they see the link, they can watch the recording. You have the ability, however, to toggle this off and decide at an individual recording level whether you want to make it available to students or not. So this means you can set up Zoom meetings for whatever you want and then decide whether or not you want the whole cohort to be able to see it. So this is the Zoom integration tool inside the LTI area. What I want to talk about now is what else it talks to in Brightspace. We have a question from Andrea. Can you quick link to the recording? The answer is no. You can't, because this is an external tool rather than part of Brightspace. Quick linking will only let you link to other parts of your subject site. So effective, we'll have a look at what the quick link tool can do in a second. We'll see how far we can go with that. All right, so I've created a series of meetings inside this tool. They're available to students if they were to come here into Communication Online Meeting Zoom. That's the start. At this point, I have to tell you as well that we cannot limit these inside this tool to any particular cohort or individual. So I can't make this meeting inside this tool specific to Port Macquarie students, Bathurst distance students, Bathurst internal. You can't do it in this tool. However, if we go back now to our subject homepage, I'm going to open up my calendar. And what I can see, if I look at my Tuesdays, 9th, 16th, 23rd, let's open it up. There is my online tutorial. It's added to the calendar automatically. And if I open the event card, there it is, weekly online tutorial, and it provides the link to Zoom, etc., inside the subject site. If it's in here, it means the students will get emails around it as well, a notification when that event is approaching, so on the day. That happens automatically because we've added it using that tool in the subject site. So that part is good. And it gets better because if we edit that event in the calendar, we can now tell it to restrict this event to particular cohorts of students. Under this attendees area, we can now limit who is going to see this in their calendar, who's going to get those reminders. So if I wanted this to be a weekly online meeting for Bathurst distance, I can now restrict. I may even consider renaming this to indicate who's going to be getting it. And the rest of the detail stays the same. When is it occurring? It is a link to the Zoom online meeting. If I hit save now, it then asks me just that one meeting or every one of them. So it said there was 14 of them. I want all 14 to be affected the same way. Hit update. So we now have our weekly online tutorials for Bathurst distance with the link to the Zoom meeting in the calendar tool. So I think those two parts of the system talking to each other like that is excellent. It also means the students, if they have the Pulse app on their mobile devices, will get push notifications when that event is approaching as well. So they don't have to be sitting in front of a computer waiting to kind of get the reminder. If they've got a mobile device as well, they're going to get notifications from Pulse about the online meeting as well. So all those three things kind of working together make this integration more effective than what it was inside i2. Now, the question we can see from Jackie is, would non-Bathurst distance students still see it inside the Zoom tool? The answer is yes. If they went in here and had a look, because inside this tool, it cannot be restricted. It's just everybody. So calendar restricted, yes. Notifications restricted, yes. But in terms of visibility, once you go in here, the view is the same for all student users. So there is that kind of downside to it. We have to acknowledge that at the end of the day, they will be able to see the same thing as all the other students. All right, the other thing I want to inform you of with this tool is if you've created a meeting in one subject site inside the LTI, or in fact, you've created a Zoom meeting even outside this tool, what you need to bring it into a subject site is this meeting ID. So this weekly online tutorial that we made, if I copy the meeting ID from here, I'm going to join another subject site now. Let's go into my sandbox. That's just another site. I'm going to open the same tool, but in this different subject site. Need some hold music. And now what I can do, if I look at these three dots that are in the top right-hand corner, I can import a meeting and it wants a meeting ID. Control V, paste in the meeting ID I just grabbed. And now we have the same meetings, the same links, the same recordings available in two different subject sites. This feature has only started working in the last few weeks. Up until now, you could not associate one Zoom meeting with multiple LTIs, multiple subject sites. Now you can, which has some implications for those of you working in paired subject sites, for example, or subjects where you're running the same Zoom meetings and you want multiple sort of, obviously, subject offerings or different groups of people to have access to that detail, which I think is pretty great. All right, I'll stop there. Kel, what have I got in the way of questions? And we'll,
Yeah, just
yep,
I guess to clarify that the students can access through their calendar rather than having to go into Zoom.
that's
If the
correct.
meeting's, yeah.
Yep. So that calendar entry, the calendar event, we're not in viticulture. Let's go to my subject site. So the link's inside the LTI tool, but inside the calendar event, we open that up again. Find the card. We'll see that it is restricted. It says Bathurst distance after the dash there. That's a restriction in place. There's the link and that will open it up. Because we are inside the subject site as well, that authentications are also taken care of. Yeah, I think the title, Jackie, is just a really good point that labeling of the meetings is just something that I'm encouraging, whether it's communication, content, or assessment. If it's meant to be targeted, put something in the title to at least help you and the students identify that it's intended for a particular group of students. So absolutely. We can't stop them seeing it inside the tool, so we might as well let them know that it is intended for a particular group. It's a really good point. All right. Any other questions or comments about the Zoom integration at that point? I think we're all good, maybe. Excellent. All right. Well, the inFocus sessions are only 30 minutes long. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to turn off the recording. And now if any of